everybody, and welcome to Luxcana. So today we are going to have a special guest, Tomasz, and he plays top 4 in the Disney Lorcana trading game in Chicago. Hi,
Oh, sorry, I do
Tomasz.
have to. Hello, I have to put a small correction in there. Technically, it was top 3. Just
Top
to
3,
clear the air.
perfect. Okay, top 3.
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on. How are you doing?
Great. And then we
So
also
I actually have a
have.
question about that. I didn't know this, but was there a playoff in top 4 to see who gets third and who gets fourth, or was it seeding?
No, it was because it still kept the points through Swiss and everything, so it was just like final point total.
Oh, that's so interesting. I never knew how that worked, but thank you for correcting. So in the end, it's still the points matter when you get up that high.
Yeah, at that point for like the promos and invite and all that kind of stuff, it's the same as fourth, but it's cooler that I get to say third.
100%. It's so much cooler. I will make sure that I make it known that it's third. Okay, and we're also, just so everybody knows, that we're joined by one of my teammates from Luxcana, Warp 3000, John. Say hi, John.
Hello, my Discord is being a little funky right now.
Oh yeah, no worries. Did you want to get started, John? I have up
Yeah, sure. So
the deck list too, just so everybody knows.
so let's talk about. So you played a very standardized 60 card. Looks like a very hyper consistent blue red list. The only real unique thing I would say that I saw was the double dragon. How did
hmm
they perform for you relative to a lot of
Um,
people who are just on 1 or 9?
Yeah, it was. I mean, to talk about the list on the whole, I was kind of at a place where I knew I wasn't gonna have a ton of time for testing, and just like wasn't gonna have the mental bandwidth to sit down for it if I did. So I wanted to play something pretty close to stock. Shout out to Sailor because I basically just took his list and changed 2 cards. And the Stone Dragons, I mean, for me, they were really good. They're mostly for like the mirror, the other blue decks, green steel, red purple, and some of the aggro stuff. They're a bit slow, but I mean, for what I wanted them to do, they did their job. And honestly, at this point, I'm kind of looking for excuses to up that count even further.
Really? So do you think because of how much they performed in the matchups where they're good, that they even performed better than Quill in a lot of cases?
Um, it depends. I think especially the way the meta has developed right now, I feel like Quill is still very good at what it does, and the games that you want it, you still definitely want it. But like last set, it was a lot more often where a lot of your matchups or game plan was just try to find your Quill, try to get to 6 or 7 ink as fast as you can, and just slam either a Medusa or a Be Prepared. Whereas now, the way things have developed, it doesn't feel as urgent, so you can kind of get away with playing the Stone Dragon.
That makes sense. And it very clearly worked for you as you were the only blue red player to get into the very top of that event. And
Yeah,
how did your matchup spread go during the events? Was there anything crazy you faced, or was it like a standard?
actually, I can pull it up real quick. I wrote myself a little tournament report that's one of these days, I'm sure months from now, I'll kick myself in the butt to actually write this up. But scrolling through, it was a really, really diverse spread. Day one, the only deck I faced more than once was Blue Steel. I would have had a couple repeats in the last couple rounds, but I was doing well enough I was able to intentionally draw the last 2. But everything else was like Red Purple I played once, Green Steel I played once. Um, Played against some of the other stuff that would be like fringe but not unexpected. And then it wasn't until Top Cut where it was kind of just all the meta decks. But I mean, other than honestly, other than the top 4 match against the Emerald Amethyst. Basically, every other matchup, I either wanted to see the Stone Dragon actively, or at least didn't hate when I drew it.
Yeah, so I understand the value in the mirror and against green steel especially, where you can just discard all your units and not eat your hand like Fishbone. How did the dragon feel for you against red?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't
Against
hear
what
you
deck?
either.
Oh, so sorry. I was saying that I understand the Stone Dragon against green steel in the mirror. It makes a lot
Mhm.
of sense in those matchups. How did it feel into the more mid range, like red purple stuff, like just fair value decks?
So those are the matchups where you still probably like if you can find one eventually and you have the space for it, like you'll still play it and use it. It's not as like actively needed, but especially with red purple, if you get to the point where you guys have kind of traded off resources and you're not just like constantly on the back foot, it's gonna do a similar thing to Quill. So in those matchups when you do have it, the plan is you're trading off a bunch of cards anyway, and it's kind of just some extra value there. Just the way those games play out, it's not like a core game plan because I'd much rather just be stopping their Flins, stopping their castles, kind of getting ink eventually. But once you do get to that point of the game, it's the best card at getting ink eventually.
That makes a lot of sense. It does scale super well into the late game. I just was worried if you had time to cast it. Because unlike Fishbone, it kind of takes a while, and they're generally on like the Sisu and Flynn plan
Yeah,
against you.
yeah. The games where they have their 2, 3, 4, or even the one drop in there too. Like a lot of times you won't have time for it. Kind of with the I guess when you want to say like ideal hands. But the games that get a little scrappy, it kind of does about the same as Quill, and it still does what it needs to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. So why did you? I guess you said you shout out to Sailor. His list was very standardized. It was tested a lot in our internal testing. It was a very popular list. How did you
Mhm.
like the four develops? Because that's been controversial before this set. A lot of people just did not like cantrips in this game, but it seemed really good in this set for smoothing out your draws.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Last set, I'd say like kind of the back half of last set, I was playing a lot of blue red. Before that, I was trying to play some blue steel, and that was another deck where develop was really contentious. If I remember right, I think it was split just about 50-50 if people were playing it or not. And I don't know if it's so much that like just the way the lists were that I tried out, I came around on it, or if things have really changed that much. But especially with how many mirrors you're expecting, and with green steel, kind of just making sure you have stuff on curve. Just having that extra potential look at a one jump ahead turn one is really the main reason I want it. And then it is nice between the develop, the how far I'll go, and the Grammatalas. You have such a density of cantrips or cantrip like effects that in the mid game, if you're both stalling out and you're both top decking, you get to a point where once you find the first one, it just kind of cascades into the next. And if you have 12 ink laying around, then you can flip a develop into a Tala, into a how far I'll go. And just having more outs to start that chain felt really nice.
Yeah, it makes sense because you lower your threat density some, but you have such a high card selection. You'll
Hmm.
have a higher card quality overall. It's a typical cantrip argument in most card games. A lot of people were like, especially in set one, people were like, "Oh, develop your brain's gonna be good," and then it just like didn't see any play at all for the first three sets very much. It was always contentious, and everyone always debated it. So I found it interesting that it's starting to see play as a 4 of finally now that we're into the more powerful stages of the game, and I guess that has to do with some of the power level of your hits. Like turn two, what would you say the win rate difference between turn two one jump ahead and not having it is?
Um,
Ooh, I like that
I don't
question.
even want to like. I don't honestly want to even pretend like I can put a real number on it. A lot of that stuff, I feel like more often than not, I don't get enough volume of games to really like feel that stuff out. So a lot of it, I'll joke I do a lot of vibes based testing, but it's definitely like if you don't have the one jump ahead, you feel like you're starting the game behind. Is the best way I'd explain it. And I think that kind of plays into part of why I feel develop is more important now than it was last set. Is like you could at least kind of trick yourself into thinking that playing Queen of Hearts was a good turn two, and now one jump is your only good turn two play.
So I have
Yeah,
a
that makes a lot of
question. So you would say like one jump is the only turn two play. You don't like scuttle?
Um, it Scuttle's good if you have enough items to support it, but I'd still rather be playing one jump. Um,
Okay.
I I think it depends though. That would be one of those things that really comes down to like the specific deck list that we're talking about.
Interesting. Sorry, John, you can go back.
No, you're good. You're allowed to ask any questions as well. I was just curious about the cantripping, because I mean it has been something that's been very back and forth, and all the Discord servers and all the team discussions I've had for blue is whether it's actually worth playing. Now, another interesting thought I wanted to bring this up is we saw some blue red lists that had no one jump ahead, and they were doing like playing Cruella, the 3/2 that becomes evasive, or they're just trying to contest the board early instead. What is your thought on
Mhm.
that?
So it's something like those lists specifically I haven't played too much of. Like some of the similar lists in that vein that people have been developing, I've played a little bit of, but I don't have a ton of experience with that build specifically. Just with the archetype as a whole, though, the way I've been kind of slowly realizing I see it is that blue red does two things really well. It can push on the axis of ramp and the axis of card draw, and I think like the more stock build of the deck does a really good job of pushing that ramp axis as far as it can, whereas the other builds I think lean heavier into drawing cards, and it's kind of more a matter of just like picking where you want to lie on that spectrum. Not to say both decks can't do the other. It's just I think one is maximizing for one aspect versus the other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good way to look at it too.
John, do you mind if I ask a question?
Yeah, no, ask as many.
Okay, so my question has to do with the be prepared. So I saw that you played three. And now,
Mhm.
because we're going into Chicago with a lot of green steel decks, were you worried that they were going to be taken from your hand or that you were going to see them more often than you wanted to? Or did you find having three was like the sweet spot?
I think sweet spot is a good word for it. Kind of leading up to the event, I know the original lists that were coming out at the start of the set were kind of slowly going down to the point that people at one point were playing none, and then it was slowly creeping back in. And it just really the thing for me was like playing three was enough where when you get to those games where their hand's empty, your hand is empty, and you're just drawing cards off the top, you want enough in the deck that you can just draw one and kind of turn around the game. With the Ursula stuff, with it getting sniped from being a song, it's kind of one of those things when like if they hit it turn six, it feels bad, but I think the card is just strong enough that you can't really worry too much about it. I'm much more worried about them playing Ursula and taking a one jump when I'm on the draw, or taking a how far I'll go that I really need to get back in the game. And I think
Okay.
the be prepared is just kind of collateral that you have to deal with.
Very interesting. I actually just bumped mine up too. So that's what I was just curious if you saw like a lot of green steel matches where they were taking the be prepared.
Yeah, yeah, and it definitely happens. And like I said, when they get the timing just right and they snipe it out of your hand, it feels really bad. Luckily, now that we do have the Sisu that can also clean stuff up, it's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit harder for them to rely on that. So personally, I haven't seen it as often, just because the Ursulas tend to come down sooner now that people can't like reliably always hit your board clear. Which that's another thing, having the split on those two effects is really nice, is because they have to consider playing around both, and if you have both, you pick which one's better, but sometimes they just guess wrong.
Okay. Thank you. And then now my other question has to do with the Madame Medusa and Lady Tremaine. So I saw that you only play Medusa and no Lady Tremaines, but you can't really get rid of Bucky with Medusa. So like, what was like your thought process behind that?
Um, it mostly a lot of it came down to like the consistency stuff that we've been harping on. I definitely think Tremaine has its spots, and like you said, if you're able to get a Bucky with it, or if you're playing the mirror and the board's clear, Tremaine's a lot better against an opposing Tamatoa. But in the heads up, Medusa clears their Tremaines, whereas it's harder to go the other way around. And I kind of just decided that Medusa was a stronger card kind of into the meta as a whole. And I would rather just more consistently see that card and just accept the less often cases where Tremaine would be better.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. I
Mhm.
always go back and forth whether like I should play Lady Tremaine or Medusa. But like the 4/4 is pretty strong compared to like the 3/4.
Yeah, and it's definitely, if I were to change things up a little bit, it's something that I'd keep in mind as an option. But with it as well, like this deck is surprisingly tight on the uninkable count. I've seen a lot of people playing up to, I think, like 24 or even 25 uninkables, whereas I was pretty conservative about it, and even still, I feel a little iffy.
Now, do you feel like you're conservative about the uninkable count because of like the 2 game format? Because you have to have a more of a
I
consistent deck for that.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I think there's still kind of some debate in the community about that. If that consistency is more valuable than just playing potentially a more powerful version of a deck and just like assuming things will work out. The way I looked at it though, I figured the deck is really strong at doing its main plan, and I just figured if I can have as many games as possible where I can at least play the game and kind of just figure things out from there, I would rather kind of shy on lowering the uninkable count and sort of figuring things out from there than risk, having to mulligan like 5 or 6 cards and just kind of break off.
Gotcha. My other question has to do with the Maleficent Dragon. Did you find that you were actually using the dragon or were you using it more to ink?
Um, I would say it's kind of 50-50. If it was in my opening hand or one of my first few draws, then it was almost always ink, kind of without thinking about it. But once you get to the point of the game where you're, drawing it off the top, the game's gone a little bit longer. There's just a lot of spots where, it still costs 9, just like it always has, but it's also still hits everything just like it always has. So I just wanted to have access to all 4 of them.
Cool. Okay. Is there anything you would change about this deck? Maybe add any other different items?
Um, it's something I've considered and I'm keeping in mind, but I haven't played enough games with other options to make up my mind on it. I was actually, fun story. I was telling Warp before the event, if he could find me a foil copy of Medallion Weights, then I would add it to the deck and play 61 cards just for him. I don't know if that card's fully going to pan out, but having access to something like that is definitely intriguing.
You play a full foil deck?
Not yet. I'm slowly working towards it.
You're
I
working on to
definitely
like the
spent,
max rarity?
yeah, I spent a good amount of time Friday after we checked in, and then sometime Saturday after day one ended, going around to the vendors and picking up as many extra foils as I could.
That's awesome. I'm not allowed to play with foils because I don't know how to shuffle correctly. So then I think my other question had to do with, so whenever I was playing Red Blue, I found that I was, especially with playing any steals with the whole new world, mainly like yellow steel, is that I literally, they won because I literally did not have a deck anymore because I just kept drawing. So what can like, how can I like possibly like know when to, like, let's just say like I'm not going to draw on the popsicle, but I still want to place it down. When do you know that?
I think honestly that's one of the harder things with the deck.
Okay.
There's a lot of situations like that that are very, contextual. I don't really have any like go-to, heuristics or anything like that.
Okay.
I My advice is usually you just got to go based on vibes. If it feels like, they're gearing up for something, if you can sniff out the whole new world, then, and your hand's not looking too bad, then sometimes you can, play a little bit safer. Sometimes though, if you're really far behind, you got to just pedal to the metal and hope they don't have it.
Yeah, I found that my opponent was like egging me on to draw, and I just was not picking up on that I did not have to
Mhm.
draw for some of these cards. So it
Yeah, and
ended
that's
up,
also like it comes up a lot with this deck, but just any deck playing against Whole New World, it is one of those things where like, even if you want to keep the game moving along and keep the pace, but just taking a second to see what cards they discarded, double checking how many of them actually that they've played, because sometimes they have a second one and they discard it. And if you ever get to the point where you look at their discard pile and you realize all four are there, then it's like uh, the a switch is flipped, and
uh-huh.
you're like, okay, now I don't have to worry about it. I can just draw as many cards as I want.
And then for new players like myself, you suggest like looking at the discard pile how often? As I have to admit, even when I played in Atlanta, I did not
Hmm.
touch my opponent's discard whatsoever.
I honestly I don't do it very often. Usually only comes up if there's something specific that I'm looking for. So
Like the
like
whole new world.
yeah, like in that case, checking whole new worlds. If I'm playing against the mirror, if it feels like the game has gone on pretty long and I've just maleficented their second crab, and I'm like, hey, they might be out of Tamatoas. Just like doing a quick check, so I have a mental count on that. But it doesn't come up super often. It's more one of those things just to keep in mind, because when it does matter, you're going to be glad with yourself for remembering.
Okay. So then also, you said that you took your deck from Sailor. Which two
Mhm.
cards did you change, and why did you change them?
So I ended up changing, what was it? I took out one of the 3-drop Sisus, and I cut one of the Fishbone Quills to make room for the Great Stone Dragon. Um,
Okay.
and that was I had decided that I wanted to try out the Stone Dragon because people had been talking about having success with it. And I did a little bit of testing with it. I was liking what I was seeing, but I was only playing one, and I decided if I think this card is good, if it's as good as other people are saying, then I really want to be playing two so I can find it when I need it.
Mm-hmm.
So I cut the fourth Fishbone Quill, added the two Stone Dragons, was staring at a 61 card deck list for basically the entire week before Chicago. A lot of frantic DMs to friends like, hey, what is the last card? What do I get rid of? Could not for the life of me find anything that I wanted to cut, and I just kind of came to the decision that the extra 3-drop Sisu just wasn't impressing me. Not really based off anything too much, but just kind of hoping that two would be enough.
Yeah, I have to admit, I find that I've been inking the 3-drop Sisu more than I have been playing it, because it
Mhm.
really depends on how many cards your opponent has in their hand, if it's powerful or not.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely a card that can be a lot more situational than it looks at first glance. But it's still an effect that I like to have access to, which I think there's not anything wrong with having cards like that. Like honestly, for me over the weekend, a lot of times Fishbone Quill was that card where I was glad I
Oh,
still had them in my deck, but I was inking them, probably 3/4 of the time.
wow. I
Yeah, that
did.
actually surprises me quite a bit because Fishbone Quill is like it's the big deal everyone talks about. Like it's the problem
Mhm.
with Flaversham, how you just ramp into infinity and draw infinite cards. But that's interesting that you said you ink it. I guess did you play against a lot of green steel?
Let me double check again real quick. If I'm not mistaken, I played against it once day one, and then played against its top 64 and top 8. So I played against it 3 times total. Um, it's I think I am definitely a lot more willing to throw away the quill than a lot of other red blue pilots. I don't, some of that could have just been the way the games themselves played out. There's always going to be some variance in that. My plans for some of the matchups might have just been just a little bit different. But I found that like unless I had a very specific reason to kind of like ramp up super fast with it, I was a lot more looking to use the one jumps and the how far all goes. And I just felt like I ran into a lot of spots where burning the cards in my hand, at least at the time, felt like it wasn't going to be as valuable as having the quill in play.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Now,
Yeah, I
my
mean,
next question for you was, how did the two-game format feel?
um, I've had this discussion a couple times. My answer just kind of always ends up boiling down to the word awkward. I I think it
That's a good word.
solves a lot of, yeah. It definitely that's honestly how I felt after basically every round. Um, it it does a lot of what they kind of set out to do with it. It definitely helped reduce round times. It you know One person going first one game and then the other person going first the second definitely reduces how much the die roll matters. But just the way it ends up, where you feel great if you get the 2-0, you feel kind of meh if you get the 1-1, and then you feel absolutely awful for getting the 0-2. So just more often than not, either one or both players end up walking away awkward. And then for like tournament structure on the whole, it also makes things really weird where for like the day 2 cut, you don't really know where that point cut is gonna line up until probably the very last round. And that just kind of leaves a lot of people guessing.
Yeah, I know. I feel like we're always trying to figure out like how many points you need to get. If you're
Mhm.
making it, is it even worth staying like up to like the round 8 or something?
Yeah, actually, quick tangent. I have a fun story about that.
Yeah,
At
let's
the
hear it.
end of round 8, so round 7, I was like one table too low to be able to comfortably split my round. So played it out, and we get to round 8, walk in the hallway, hanging out. I was able to split with my opponent, and there's a guy who's just freaking out in the hallway. He is sweating his tiebreakers. He won, but he's like right on that cusp, and he
Yeah.
doesn't know he was at like 38 or 39 points. Nobody knows where the line's gonna be, and he is just losing his mind because he's gotten so close, but he's convinced that he's gonna have to play the last round and try to get the 2-0 to make it. And he's on the phone talking to his buddy. And I like come up to him. I'm like, man, you got this. Like it's fine. Take a deep breath. Like I can't tell you for sure what the numbers are because I don't even know myself. But like trust me, you got this. Just split with your opponent. You'll be good. And he like calms down a little bit, still a little shaken, but he goes, presumably splits, and then day 2 rolls around, and he finds me in the hallway as I'm getting ready for the player meeting, and he's like, "Hey, you're Thomas, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Dude, I remember you from yesterday. Guess what? I'm your first opponent in Top Cut." I was like, "Holy shit!" So, had to crush his dreams after that, but he was a great sport about it.
You had to put him in his place.
Yeah, he was great. We talked after the event. Super cool dude. I'm blanking on his name at the moment because it's been a long day and I don't want to butcher it. So let me check real quick.
I have
Shout out
some
to shout out to Hunter. He was a
Hunter.
great guy. Yeah.
Do we know what he was playing?
He was playing Green Steel.
Green Steel. Very cool.
Oh, there he is. Hunter Roth.
You
Shout
found
out to
him?
Hunter.
What number was he?
Super cool dude. He was 54th after
54th found him.
Swiss.
Yep.
Yeah, he's a super nice dude. I'm so glad I got to meet him. I'm sure he's going to be kicking ass at plenty of these challenges.
So I have to admit, I don't think I've ever like met anybody at like the Lorcana event that I didn't like or wasn't like a cool person to meet in this. So I love that that's like the community that we have here.
Oh yeah, yeah. Everybody I've met has been super great.
Do you have any other questions, John?
No, I got all my questions answered.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask the chat to see if they have any. And let's see. Hey, did I miss any questions? Usually I like to give them a few times, a few minutes to like type. Okay. Somebody wrote, "How is he so handsome?" Maybe they know who you are. That's funny. And now, so are you a big advocate of not going over 60 cards?
Yeah, I understand the reasonings for why it should at least be an option that's on the table. But I think right now, especially with this deck, I'm very firmly on the 60 card team.
Do you think that you're ever going to change from red blue to possibly the meta like green steel?
It's definitely possible. Part of the reason why I stuck with blue red for this event was just because I had recent experience with it. I was also still missing 3 Diablos, and I didn't really feel like trying to find those. So I don't have much of an issue with swapping decks, but I do also value playing what I'm familiar with. So it'll probably just come down to what I have time to practice.
Are you going to be in Texas?
Right now, I don't have any plans to go. We'll see if anything changes last minute. But won't be in Texas. Also, probably not going to be in Toronto. We'll see how things shake out. I'm hoping I can make it out to at least one of Vegas or Seattle, if not both. But gotta play it by ear and see how everything shakes out with that.
Yeah. Any other questions, chatters? Okay, so this one said, don't know if he already talked about this, but how does he approach the red-purple matchup? Seems to be one of the hardest for this deck. Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. Okay, sorry.
Oh, no, I was going to say that's a good question. Definitely out of like the main meta decks, red-purple has one of the best abilities to just kind of play their curve out, put you on the back foot. I haven't tested against it a ton, and I haven't played against it kind of more than like anything else, so I don't have a ton of super in-depth thoughts on it other than just I hate to always use it as an answer, but just to kind of play the games based on vibes. But I mean, main plan,
big vibes,
kind of just hope. Yeah, just hope they don't have the like Flynn Sisu Castle thing. Just if they do have it, really just kind of not letting yourself get kind of I guess like shocked by it, not overreacting. Take a deep breath, look at your lines. They can get some lore really fast, but you still have ways to stabilize. And just if I see cards like Brawl in my opening hand, or like the 3-drop Sisu, that's like the one matchup where it's the best in. Keep those, but still just kind of trying to mulligan for my main game plan, not letting it get to me too much. But that deck is probably one of your worst matchups, at least for stuff you can expect to see. And sometimes you kind of just got to accept the fact that if they have the top 20% of their draws and you don't have a hand to match, then sometimes they're just gonna get you.
Yeah, I have to admit, I am a red-purple player, and I love playing against the red-blue.
Well, that's because you haven't played against me yet.
We can always play on TTS if you need some more practice against red-purple.
Ooh, I'll definitely have to take you up on that.
Any other questions, chatters? But I did really like what you said about like even if like let's just say I open up the perfect card for red purple, you still just have to stick to your own game and play like how you would and just like answer the problems. I thought that was really good.
Yeah, yeah, and like you might have to take a turn off playing your Hiram so that you can brawl their Flynn, or you might have to delay the how far I'll go by a turn. But just kind of not getting too caught up on like, okay, it's turn two. This is what I have to do. It's turn three. This is what I have to do. Sometimes you can deviate. The games aren't always perfect, and it's not to say it's unwinnable, but sometimes you just gotta take a minute and figure out what you gotta do.
So we have a lot of new players coming on and asking questions. Do you have any pointers for them?
Um, are you talking like new player entirely or like new to this deck?
Probably new player to Lorcana entirely. Like people that want to get into
Um,
Lorcana. You can even like talk about both ways, like new to red blue or and new to Lorcana, because I would love to hear your insights on both.
yeah, I mean, new to like Lorcana as a whole, I would say, uh, honestly, the not the most important thing, but nice if you can find it, is just find other people to play with. If that's at a local game store, or if you can get some of your friends into the game with you. Especially when you're first starting out, just playing as much as you can to just get familiar with everything definitely helps. Um, Keeping an eye on like what people are playing in tournaments, what the meta decks are, that can be helpful to give you an idea of like what cards are good, what you should look out for. But if you look at the top four decks and you decide, I don't really like any of those, I'm gonna go play this purple steel deck instead. Like that's totally fine too. Find what you enjoy, play the decks that you like, and that will help you play more, which will help you learn faster.
It's almost like when you're playing like the puppy deck because you like the 101 Dalmatians. It's like you
Yeah,
still need to have fun with that.
yeah, exactly. And just kind of the biggest thing is just not beating yourself up about not knowing the game. Like everyone's got to start somewhere. I picked up this game and had no idea what I was doing when I started. And it's a lot about just getting yourself familiar with things. Go at your own pace and just always look for things you can do a little bit better.
What about to red blue now? I'd like to hear how that differs.
Yeah, so for red blue specifically, I would say one thing that is going to help with any deck, but especially a deck like this where you have kind of such polarizing differences between like your good draws and your bad draws. Um, if you can do this playing with someone else or even just on your own, getting a feel for mulliganing, even just sitting at your desk, drawing an opening seven, figuring out what you would keep, what you'd put back, and just getting comfortable with like how many cards I can get away with putting back while still feeling comfortable is definitely something that will help a lot with blue red. Throughout the weekend, I ran into a lot of situations where I would mulligan 5 or 6 cards, and I just had to be comfortable with the fact that that was going to happen. And if I had only mulled, 2 or 3, my hand probably wouldn't have gone anywhere.
So now my other question is more, it's actually not a question, it's more of a statement. You have to be a little bit more patient with red blue because you don't really gain that much lore right away.
Yeah, so it's a deck where, like, kind of a lot of decks are going to have like a phase of the game where they're developing their game plan. And a lot of the more aggressive decks, that's going to include questing a lot with your small characters. This deck focuses a lot more of the development stage on ramping your ink, drawing extra cards, and you kind of just quest eventually once the game's already over.
Exactly, like Lucky Dime comes into play, then you're kind of gaining that lore slowly but surely. We actually had someone that says, Hawk to a spit on that thing, said, that's a nice username, said, I had a buddy that learned the day before at an SCG con in Vegas, and he won the 5K and one of the 1Ks and said it was basic compared to the other TCG. So now he wants to learn. So as you can see, we have like a lot of new people wanting to get into Lorcana. I actually have to admit, I
Yeah.
think Red Blue is one of the harder decks to learn and be successful with right off the bat. I do think it takes like more practice than the other decks. Do you agree with that?
Um, yeah, I can definitely see that. I think part of it would also probably be a playstyle thing. Like I think something like this might kind of click for a smaller section of the player base versus something that's a little bit more like well-rounded. And this is a deck that has a lot of stuff where it almost feels like the deck is playing itself. Like if you have your popsicle on turn one and your one jump on turn two, and then your Irem on turn three, like it's kind of obvious that's what you're going to do. But it's also a deck that will very much reward you for like having those kinds of opening hands and then finding a different set of plays that might not normally be what you want to do, but for the situation is better. And just it rewards you a lot for, I don't even know how to explain it, but just like kind of having an eye for those non-obvious plays.
Okay. Like kind of like not doing what you want to do, but like thinking and being creative.
Yeah, yeah, like a good example, like a tip I can give on the deck. How far I'll go is a song. If you can sing it, it's great. Playing cards for free is amazing.
Of
I
course.
think a lot of what's it? Yeah, yeah, you got it there. Um, and there's a very natural kind of curve of playing your Grammatala on turn four and then singing with it the next turn, or playing your Medusa and then singing with it the turn after that. Um, and I think a lot of players can, and not to use the word like trap, because you're probably still making good plays, but I think people can get caught up on kind of trying to sing the card too often. Whereas sometimes, the way the game is shaping up, maybe taking turn four to just play the how far I'll go instead of playing the grandma first, maybe that gets you that extra ink a turn early, and that lets you then play your Medusa a turn early, or gets up to be prepared a turn sooner. Like sometimes stuff like that where it'll feel kind of non-ideal because you have more like valuable ways to use the cards. It's just kind of like the stuff that can come up with it.
I kind of like that thinking because there's sometimes where, because I play red purple, I ink friends on the other side, and that's like a
Mhm.
big no no. But hey, you never know. It could just be the opportunity where I have to.
Yeah, sometimes you gotta.
Is there any other questions, chatters? We have some time to still pick his brain. Oh, actually, I did have a last question for you.
Yeah.
Did you play any other TCGs before playing Lorcana?
Oh, sorry, my end cut out. What was that?
Oh, I said, did you play any other TCGs before playing Lorcana?
Yeah, I've been playing Magic since I believe about 2015. That's
Oh,
been kind of
wow.
my main TCG. I played Hearthstone for like a year when it came out, but that was so long ago and so brief, I don't really count it.
So,
But other than Magic, Lorcana's really been the main TCG that I've put this much time into.
okay, so I kind of heard that Lorcana is a little bit more difficult than Magic. Do you agree with that?
Um, I would say Magic, because of the way like the mechanics and the rules engine and stuff works. Magic is definitely a more complicated game. Um, I think Lorcana has a lot of depth as well. It's just because they have different enough like game engines and rule sets, a lot of the complexity is baked into different things. So like in Lorcana, you have a decision every single turn about if you want to ink, what you want to ink, which card you're playing, which card you're inking, like
Exactly.
all that stuff. Whereas that doesn't come up in Magic. But on the other hand, in Magic you can do stuff on your opponent's turn, so you have a lot more opportunities for back and forth. So I don't necessarily think that one is like for sure more difficult than the other. I think it just is rewards different skill sets, is how I'd say it.
Very interesting. So we did have a question come up while you were talking. Do you ever miss the evasive Sizu win against a more aggro builds, like possibly like for set champs?
Oh, 100%. I mean, the deck that knocked me
Great
out of the
question.
tournament was Emerald Amethyst with the Curse Merfolks and that kind of stuff. Like that, it definitely would have been nice to have it there. The spot where I don't miss it is when I draw the Sisu that I'm able to ink, and then I don't miss my fourth ink. I think the evasive Sisu is very strong for what it does. Unfortunately, I could not find slots, at least in this version of the deck, that I felt comfortable kind of cutting cards to play it, because I didn't want to go up on the uninkable count anymore, and I didn't want to cut any of the uninkable cards I already had to make room for it. So it's kind of one of those things. It would have been nice to have. I just couldn't find a spot that made sense.
Okay. You know what I was going to say? I'm like, well, you could play 63 cards.
Nope, not gonna do it.
And then, do you have any other pointers for the new players besides just like practicing and finding like locals?
I mean, just kind of the generic advice that everybody always gives. If you can find a consistent group to play with, that's always good. If you're able to find people that think are better players than you, getting a chance to talk with them or play with them is always going to help you improve a lot. Kind of just getting out there in the broader Lorcana community, whether it's through like Twitter or a lot of the discords are really good places. Like just kind of talking to other people is one of the best ways to fast track your learning.
Awesome. So now, going back to like finding that core group of people, do you think that the more you play test with someone, you learn their play style, and that's going to hurt you when you go up against other people, different
I
people?
think, yeah, I think that's something that definitely has the possibility to influence it.
Okay.
Um, if it's something that you keep in mind and you're aware of, you can sort of like self-correct for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're trying to practice, like if you're trying to do like very focused practice, like we're sitting down, I want to play this exact list of blue red that I have against, say, your red purple deck, and we want to figure out, okay, if I change these three cards, is it going to make a difference? Then something like
Ooh.
really focused like that's where it can be helpful to basically just play with your hands revealed and kind of both of you talk through like what each deck would do on each turn, because that'll kind of self-correct for the playstyle thing as well. But yeah,
Okay.
like anything, the more opinions you can get on something, the better.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you for that. Because I always wonder, like, I do play with like the majority of the same people, so
Mhm.
I feel as if I might not. I know how they play. Like, I know like they play a little bit more controlled, so I can go like super wide and a little bit more aggressive. But then it like bites me in the butt when I go like full board. It's like you overextend, and then I lose to
Mhm.
other people.
Yeah, yeah, I've definitely run into that myself.
I guess that's just part of the game.
Hmm.
Any other questions? I think that might be it. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thank you again for having me on.
No, thank you
Yeah,
so
thank you for coming.
much.
We really enjoyed you.
Oh, wait, we have a question. Okay, so what are your thoughts on Vital Spear for castles?
I think it's definitely a very natural option to go to if you're worried about castles. I personally haven't played around with them too much just because I haven't really gotten around to testing it. But I know like the more item heavy builds have been using it to pretty good success. So if you're worried about castle, it's definitely an option you have in your toolbox.
Yeah, I kind of liked it because it gives you rush.
Hmm.
So it's
Yeah,
almost
giving the rush, giving extra strength, and the honestly the fact that it's inkable, like any card that's inkable immediately like gets a couple extra points when I'm looking at it.
exactly, especially when you're playing like a heavy uninkable deck.
Hmm.
Thank you so much for your question, Healthcliff 501. I'm just going to see if there's any more questions that come up in the chat. Yeah, as of right now, there's nothing. I guess like we all answered them.
I guess I'm just that good.
I think so. You got top 3. And I got it right this time, too. I don't know if you noticed that.
I did. I appreciated it.
But yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. I don't know if you guys come up with any other questions. Warp can always DM me. I'm happy to ramble.
Okay. I wouldn't consider it rambling. I would consider it spreading your knowledge.
Oh, don't worry. I can make sure it's rambling.
Yeah, no other questions have come up during that little ramble spiel that we just had. So, okay, so one person asked, well, Healthcliff 501, is the 4th Maleficent Dragon necessary? They found that
Mm,
sometimes it is. I found cutting it sometimes to fit other cards in.
I mean, that's probably fine. I'd personally probably still play 4 just because of how I want to build the deck, but stuff like that, especially with the inkable cards, like you have more room to get away with shaving here and there. Um, I mean, if you cut the 4th one and you like the card that you put in its place, I think as long as you have a solid reason for any changes that you make, like it can only ever be so bad, and maybe you'll stumble across a change that makes it better.
Thank you. And thank you for the question. He said, my 4th one is a foil, and I'm trying to find ways to not play it. I guess he doesn't want to play the max variety deck like you.
Oh, just DM me on Twitter. I will send you a non-foil one, and you can send me the foil back. We'll
There
fix
you
it
go,
that way.
Healthcliff 501. A nice trade. Okay, so now he also wants to know, can older items like hooks and shield come back? What are your thoughts on
Um,
that, Thomas?
I think there's definitely room for them to make their way back in. Right now, I don't I don't feel like I have enough reason to play Hook to like try that hard to get it back. Um, but I mean, I could definitely see things shaking out in ways where you would want some. I mean, now with medallion weights and vital sphere, being other options for like similar effects. I think there's enough of a spread where even if it's not hook specifically, like if you feel like you want something in that vein, you can probably find room for it. Shield, I think the like very item heavy queen builds of blue red are already making pretty good use of shield. I think between shield and vital sphere, those would be the cards that I'd be considering if I were to ever cut the ice blocks from this deck. Um, so I mean, it could definitely come back. I don't see it right now just because I haven't felt like I needed to make that much of a change to the deck. But there's nothing wrong with them. I mean, again, I'm trying really hard to keep my deck to 60 cards, and sometimes good cards don't make the cut just because you've decided that these 60 are enough better.
Did you like that answer, Healthcliff 501? I have to admit, just so you know, Thomas, I'm playing 64 cards right now. Is that like nails on a chalkboard for you?
Sorry, I had to step away for a minute when you said that. I mean, it's probably fine. Honestly, like it's fine.
As
You
it's
said
like
you're
on
playing.
fire, red, purple.
Yeah, it's probably fine.
It's really fine against your deck.
Yeah, just play like 80 cards. You don't need the Flins against me. It's all right.
That's like my win card. But yeah, all info is good, Healthcliff. Any other questions that you want to ask? This is your chance. And I am going to check our stock in the back to see if we have any foil medallion weights. And I'll definitely let you know. I would love to see that deck go to 61 cards. Yeah, I think we might be good here, you guys.
All right.
Yeah, nothing else. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you again for having me. I mean, like I said, if anybody has any other questions after the fact, like I always love talking about this.
We got
stuff,
another one. We got another one. How important is getting Flav, FLAV, for draw against Bucky as opposed to outing it the Diablo with Bras? I think Flav is Flavor Sham.
Yeah, definitely Flavor Sham. It depends is my answer. That matchup specifically is very context dependent. It depends how much ramp you have, if you're on the player draw, if they have the Bucky draw. If their Diablo is just them playing it on turn 3 versus shifting it, like that'll change things a lot. So it honestly just really depends. You kind of just have to look at your hand, figure out how you want to play probably the next couple turns, and just decide if getting the Diablo out of the way is going to be more important to you than kind of refilling your hand. Sometimes you can definitely play that matchup where you just accept the fact that you're going to go to no cards in hand and just play off the top of your deck. But that question specifically is really hard to answer without like having an actual game play out in front of me.
Okay. I just feel like at least for like Bucky, you always want to have like the draw power.
Yeah, you do until you have exactly one card left in hand. And then you just hope that it's not a good one that they're going to get rid of.
Very true. And then you just have to hope for like a be prepared until you can get rid of the Bucky.
Yeah, and then we circle all the way back around to the beginning, and that's why I like having three be prepareds in the deck.
There you go. It's like a full circle. So Health Clip 501 says, that's fair. I'm always stuck on those turn threes win against GS Green Steel.
Yeah, and that I mean, unfortunately, that's just one of those spots where a lot of it is going to come down to your practice in the matchup and kind of what you've decided your overall plan is going to be. But I will say for that, without having like a specific board state or whatever to look at, it's definitely one of the matchups where you are better off deciding what your plan is and then sticking to it, even if that might not be like 100% the most optimal way, as opposed to kind of flip flopping back and forth, because that is how you lose against green steel. Is like, one turn you decide, oh, I'm gonna ramp now, and then you don't draw cards, then you have like two left and they discard them both, or you decide you're gonna draw a bunch of cards and they play their third Bucky and suddenly you don't have any cards. So I think that matchup in general, just kind of figure out how you want to play that specific game and then just stick to your plan.
Do you think that turn three is like a pivotal point in most games?
Um,
That's when you
yeah,
that's when you decide if you want to
yeah.
brawl. That's when you decide if you want to like Hiram or like kind of what to ink, like brawl versus fishbone quail, or like if I decide I wanted to sing with the friends or ink it. Like I do feel like turn three could be like a big pivotal point in some matches.
Yeah, definitely the way like these four sets have shaken out. Like you definitely get a lot of games where like the game itself might take a while. You might go to like turn 15 or whatever before somebody actually wins. But how you decide to sequence those first like three or four turns can definitely have like a ripple effect through the rest of the game.
What's like your perfect mulligan in your hand?
The kind of perfect hand you're looking for is going to have at least one popsicle, at least one jump ahead, at least one Hiram. And then from there, it's a little less specific, kind of just enough ink to play stuff out. If you're playing against some of the slower decks, like the other blue decks, that's when you'd really like to have a how far I'll go. If you're playing against like red, purple, or green steel, that's where you want the brawls. But the popsicle, one jump, and Hiram are definitely your main three cards.
Okay. So that's what we need to kind of look for when we're mulliganing.
hmm Yeah, like if I look at my opening hand and it doesn't have any of those three, there is a very good chance I am mulliganing like six or seven cards.
Wow. Okay. That's really good to know.
Yeah, and that's one of those things like I was talking about, just getting practice with the mulligan, even if it's just you sitting there by yourself, like just going through and mulliganing on your own, like just getting comfortable with how aggressively you can throw cards back, or if the hand is close, maybe it's a spot where you want to keep some cards just to have guaranteed ink. Like that's one of the things that you can practice with this deck that will make a lot of difference, even if it isn't like surface level really obvious, but kind of subtly over time, you'll notice that you're winning a lot more games.
Okay. So when it like a big thing that you think people should work on is mulliganing.
Yeah, and like I was talking about with the deck changes, is like you don't have to, always get like 100% the most optimal mulligan. Like, if you put back three cards and like a supercomputer says you should have put back four, like it's not the end of the world. But as long as every choice you're making has some sort of reasoning behind it, that's how you're gonna improve your play, and that's how you're gonna get better.
Yeah, thank you for that.
hmm
So, Healthcliff 501, you think slipping in a Tremaine in for a Medusa would help or hurt? And I think we had this discussion a little bit before, that you kind of just
Yeah.
like the Medusa more than the Tremaine because of its like attack power, right?
With the extra strength, it definitely helps. The biggest thing is I just feel like kind of over the whole meta game, kind of in a vacuum. I think Medusa is the stronger card, and I just wanted to maximize how many I had. I wanted to make sure I had four, make sure I saw it as often as possible. Um, like I said, depending on what you're expecting to play against, like I see reasonings for playing the Tremaine or playing like a split of them. I personally decided that I wanted all of the Medusas and just kind of was going to accept that sometimes I would run into spots where I couldn't deal with something because I didn't have the Tremaine. But I felt like overall the Medusa was the stronger card. I think we got into it a little bit more earlier, so if you do have time to go back and watch the VOD, I probably
Yeah,
mentioned some
we're
stuff there
also
that
going
I'm
to be
forgetting
putting
now.
this on YouTube as well.
Oh, perfect.
So you guys can always go back if we missed some questions. And the YouTube is going to be Luxcana. Any other questions before Thomas leaves? Healthcliff 501 just says thanks for all of the info.
Oh, always happy to help.
Well, I hope that we'll be able to see each other in Vegas. Be nice to put a face to the name.
I'm gonna try real hard to get out there, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Oh, excuse me.
Okay, thank you so much, guys, again for coming on.
And thank you again for having me.
Yeah. John, are you good?
Yeah. Thanks again for coming, Thomas. We really appreciate it. It was great.
Okay, bye, guys.
See ya.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming in, asking all your questions. I hope we learned a lot from Thomas and that we'll be able to build decks that possibly could beat his or just learn from it and like his rationale. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye.